Hi, welcome to Exploring Sunday Scriptures on this Tuesday, December the 6th, 2022. Hard to believe that we're already looking at the scriptures for the third Sunday of Advent. I guess I'm not wrapping my mind around the fact that Christmas is a lot closer than I have envisioned it to be. I guess it just seems like we just sat down to Thanksgiving dinner to think that we're already approaching the third Sunday of Advent, only one more Sunday beyond this one before we'll be gathering for the Nativity of Christ, Christmas Eve, preparing for Christ's birth in our life. We continue with some of the same themes that we've had in prior weeks, as well as different things that now really start to reach into what we would call the Christmas story. So, as in the past, the prophet Isaiah has figured prominently as the prophet of this season of Advent and the one that foretells of the Messiah to come. So we continue with readings from the prophet Isaiah. We also continue with further readings that shine a light on John the Baptist. This is much later than we had that voice in the wilderness speaking from this past week, that we now encounter John, who is trying to shine a light on who Jesus is. Now, all of our Advent preparations are a both and in the sense of they are encouraging us to recall the historical event of the birth of Jesus of Nazareth some more than 2,000 years ago. At the same time that they are encouraging us to look ahead for Christ's return in the future. So you might call this preparing for when that next birth, that final consummation, will occur. And what are the conditions that need to be there for us to be ready for that return? So as much as we look at what were the conditions upon Christ's initial birth and how was the world unprepared for that, and what did the world do in the face of that proclamation and preaching and teaching and ministry of Jesus that was inclusive and forgiving and graceful, and encouraging a different way of being. What did it do then? Put Jesus to death. What did God do as a response? Rose to new life. So also, how can we make sure that unlike Jesus's first arrival, there is room in our hearts and lives, just as there was no room at his first arrival? We want to make sure that that's not the case upon Jesus's second coming. So how do we make sure that things are right? Part of our preparation through the season of Christmas, even our decorating in a sense, is trying to get ready to make things right, to be expressive of our faith, of our hope, and of the joy that God brings to life and living itself. So we also have a reading from James that talks about patience. So really kind of is more of a leaning towards the second coming. Among all of the readings, this is more truly in that vein of things. And the psalm, which would typically be here, is replaced by the Magnificat, by Mary's poem or song about accepting her role and what this one will be like who is to come. So let's get into our readings now, as I want to encourage you always to explore the context of your life that's going to frame how you experience and hear these readings. And so that can be an interesting exercise just to see how much is at play when we are trying to listen for God's word in our lives, to go through, well, what all am I managing or dealing with right now personally and within the world? What's happening in the world, that in my neighborhood, what's happening in my city, in my town, what's happening in this nation, what's happening in the world, that's going to influence all the things that are there. And of course, seasonal. It's the third Sunday of Advent. So where am I in this journey, and how do I feel about Christmas and Advent, and how prepared or unprepared do I feel for what is to come, and what will be part of my Christmas celebrations this year. So Isaiah, I know I've shared in past weeks, scholars contend that there may be 2 or 3 different voices represented in this book. So they call what we have early in the book Isaiah, and what they call later in the book, or sometimes the midsection, Deutero-Isaiah, which is just another way of saying somebody who's in the same prophetic lineage, if you will. So this is someone who uses the name Isaiah, but there are little differences, and some of that we can recall based on the length of history that's represented in the book of Isaiah, as well as little linguistic changes which suggest a little bit different voice that's there. When we get to the 35th chapter where we are now, many contend that this is actually the most joy-filled and the high point of Isaiah's prophecy. But at the beginning of Isaiah's work, the people haven't yet been carried away in captivity, though the Babylonians, the Assyrians, have encircled them and will carry them away. By the time we're midway through Isaiah's work, they have been carried off into captivity. And so carrying forward those prophetic messages of hope and what is yet to come is speaking in a very desperate time and situation. Here's what we have. As I said, this is kind of the high point. This is like the biggest, most jubilant kind of moment, if you will, in Isaiah's prophecies, the 35th chapter, verses 1 through 10. I'll read it for you and then share a few reflections before we move on. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are of fearful heart, be strong and do not fear. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For water shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp. The grass shall become reeds and rushes. A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the Holy Way. The unclean shall not travel on it, but it shall be for God's people. No traveler, not even fool, shall go astray. The lion shall be there, no lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransom of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So if you have to just take this prophecy and say, what's the main theme of this? It's not only the redemption of the people from their current state, but it's overflowing joy. And this is trying to basically encourage singing in the face of adversity. So when you're down and out, trying to think of the right way to put this, when you're down and out, and the last thing that you feel is singing, or when you are oppressed. So they were carried away in captivity as slaves, lost their culture, their place, their land, the things that were special and meaningful to them. In the face of all of that, here is this encouragement to sing. And think about not only how rebellious that is, but how that really strikes at the heart of your captives, that it doesn't matter how bad the situation is, there is still reason to be joyful. Now, is it joyful about the situation you're in? No, it's joy about the situation that yet will be. What the current reality is not what the reality will be forever. And that there is this time, which speaks very well to the prophecy of this last week, that we hope for more, that that God is going to do even greater things than God has done in the past, and that all that is experienced now will be overcome by God's grace. And how is that described? Well, we have this beautiful poetry that Isaiah employs, particularly looking at the desert or the dry places and how they become transformed by this. And that transformation also being a physical transformation for people who are not able to see or hear, walk or speak, that those also shall be transformed, and all will have this capacity within them to experience God And so the land itself, as well as the creatures or God's people, will experience a transformation from how they are into something different, something new. And that's the vision that's here. Now, we do have within that some sense that on the scales of justice, God will balance those scales. So the things that are being experienced now, there will be a time in which that will be rebalanced by God. So we have, trying to think where I really heard that, and he will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He'll come and save you. So the you here is for those who remain faithful, who hold on to hope. Now I'm really leaning towards the sermon of this past week. And it's because of what is yet to come that the people need to hold on to their joy now. And that joy also is one that looks towards this restoration that will occur. Isn't just maybe, might, we hope. Wouldn't that be great? It will happen. And when that happens, people are going to go back to their homes, back to Zion, which was another name for Jerusalem, with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness. Sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So sorrow and sighing is what they're experiencing now. And it's saying that's not going to be the case. There's going to be this time in which that's not even something that could be contemplated as part of the emotional experience. And so within the context now of sorrow and sighing, it's bring joy into that. What is not what is going to be. And so be glad in the Lord now, because there is a promise, and it will happen, that things are going to change, and they are going to change to the good for those who maintain their faith and commitment to God, even in the face of what seems a situation that is unchangeable, even in the face of incredible challenge, that still hold on to that. All right, let's look at James now. This is James chapter 5, verses 7 through 10. As I said, as we began, this is the one that probably leans most heavily towards eschatology, towards that sense of Christ's return. Yet our prophecies, as much as this is seen as many of Isaiah's prophecies as fulfilled in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ, there is an element in Isaiah's prophecies that also lean us ever forward, that there was this moment of time in history, and because of the person of Jesus, we do experience and have a lot of the fulfillment of those prophecies. But there's also a sense that history is not yet in its final form. It's not yet complete. We're not yet in that place of full joy. So we are waiting also for that time, as much as we know and see that in Jesus Christ that time has begun. So here's James. Be patient, therefore, beloved, until the coming of the Lord. The farmer waits for the precious crop from the earth, being patient with it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also must be patient. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is near. Beloved, do not grumble against one another, so that you may not be judged. See, the judge is standing at the doors. As an example of suffering and patience, beloved, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. So, patience. It was 3 verses. We had 4 times that the word patience was mentioned. Now, where do I get this sense of preparation for second coming? Well, the judge is already at the door. It's kind of saying that the time is upon us. It is. We have less time than we did before. Now, James wrote a long time ago, and I know I've shared before, what can we know conclusively? That we have less time than we had before, that the judge is at the door. And among what James says, other than maintaining patience and strengthening our hearts, which is kind of strengthen your faith, your resolve, is we have a sense that there needs to be harmony among the community of faith. And it says that, strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is near. Don't grumble against one another, so that you may not be judged. Don't grumble against one another. I think this is good practical advice, particularly in the season of Advent and in the season in which often we are, preparing ourselves and preparing for our family celebrations, that we can get a little bit grumbly in this season. And here is this practical advice saying, look, God's coming is getting really close. And one thing that we can practically do is to make sure that we're not grumbling with one another, that we're not in this place. Because if we are in that place, then we should have the expectation that we are going to be judged ourselves for our grumbling, and that judgment is not going to be what we would want. So be patient, strengthen your heart. And patience, if we think of little children at this time of year, patience is a very hard thing for them to maintain, though they do have increasing excitement. But the closer we get to Christmas, the less patience they have. And here we are, the closer we get to Christ's return, the more patience that we are asked to have as we strengthen our resolve, our heart, for the ways of faith. And so that is the charge of this season as we await Christ's return, and even just the annual celebration of Christmas itself, that we need to have increasing patience, that we not grumble against one another, and that we live in harmony. All right, Matthew chapter 11. As I said, this is a return of John the Baptist. Much later, we were in the 3rd chapter last week when he just appeared in the wilderness. Now John's in prison. Why do we return to John? Well, John is a prominent figure in this season, talking about, the make straight in the highway, a desert for our God. Isaiah even referenced talking about a way through the wilderness that the righteous will walk upon. We come back to John the Baptist, now imprisoned, as he reveals who Jesus is to us. And this is a way of not only him saying, prepare the way for the one who is to come, but now showing us or helping us to appreciate the one who did come and the one for whom we are awaiting the return. So Matthew chapter 11, verse 2 through 11. When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way before you.' Truly, I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist, yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." So this is as much about John as it is about Jesus. The episode that we have, John's in prison. John had his own collection of followers, of those who believed in his message and carried on the work that he did. And so those followers, disciples, go to Jesus on behalf of John to ask Jesus the question, "Are you the one who is to come?" So remember, John's message was, prepare the way for the one who is to come. Here's John saying, is that you? This is a veiled question of asking if Jesus is the Messiah. And Jesus's answer is, tell John what you see. And what do you see? What's laid out here is what we understand to be the ministry and teachings of Jesus to be. Blind receive sight, lame walk, lepers cleansed, deaf hear, dead are raised, poor have good news brought to them. Well, why would this be significant, or what would it mean to John to hear this? these specific things come out of the prophecies about what the Messiah, the one who's going to redeem Israel, is going to do, to undertake. And in some of that, we have even some of that in the Old Testament passage for this week from Isaiah 35. But this also refers to other pieces from Isaiah that talk about the one who's going to redeem Israel and the one that ultimately would be seen as the Messiah, the Savior of Israel. So when Jesus uses these words from the prophecy, he's saying to John, not, hey, I'm the Messiah, but he's saying, this is the work that was promised in the prophecies of the Messiah. Believe what you will. So faith is always a personal reality. Jesus doesn't say, I'm the Messiah, so therefore everybody should just believe because I said it. He says, look at what's here and let that be what speaks and forms the foundation of faith. So they go away back to tell John what Jesus has said and what they have seen. And Jesus then addresses the crowds. And he addresses the crowds not about what he's just said to John's disciples. So we assume those of the crowd did not hear whatever his response was to John's disciples, or maybe that's my assumption, is that he wasn't preaching this to them, but he was answering the question to John's disciples. Now, after he's answered the question, he turns to the crowd. Maybe they recognize those people who came to ask Jesus that question as followers of John the Baptist. And so he turns to the crowd, same crowd that many of whom went out to the Jordan to be baptized by John, and says, let me tell you about John. That's essentially what he does. And he says, what'd you go out to the wilderness to see? Did you expect that you were going to see something that was easy and palatable? And so he uses the illustrations of a reed shaken by the wind, which a reed with the slightest breeze moves, or one dressed in soft robes. So again, an easy message that's going to just tell you that what your experience of is in life and living is a blessing from God, or a comfortable life is a blessing from God. No. Instead, what you got was something very different. And so what'd you go out to see? You went out to see something, and was it a prophet? And he said, yes, John was a prophet, but more than that. And he then quotes from prophetic texts, from what we would call Old Testament, from the prophets. I'm sending a messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way before you. And then he says, because everybody thinks John is pretty incredible and great, he says, it's true that there is no comparison among those born of women to John in the work that he's done to prepare. But that's work of preparation. Now, the least in the kingdom of heaven, the least of those who now follow the ways of God, the least of those who live the reign of God and the ways of God, are even greater than John. So as great as you think John was, and that's the purpose here, is what did you go out to see John for? You think he was great, right? You were moved greatly by what he said. You were baptized because you wanted that transformation. You wanted to participate. As great as you think John was, that is nothing compared to who you can be and the transformation of the world that's possible as we collectively work together for the reign of God. For the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's what we pray for weekly. It's what's upheld here. So, brief introduction to our scriptures of this week on this third Sunday of Advent: Isaiah 35, James 5, and Matthew 11. I want to conclude our time with the reading of the Magnificat, which is, as I said, in place of the psalm for this week in the lectionary. And this is Luke. Luke is where we really get the story of the Nativity by and large that we think about in our imaginations with Christmas. And this is from the first chapter, as Mary really accepts her role in the unfolding of the history of the world and in the birth of the Messiah. This is what Mary sings and says poetically. My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. Surely from now on all generations will call me blessed, For the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He's brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He's filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and to his descendants forever. Thanks for joining me for Exploring Sunday Scriptures. One more Sunday of Advent, one more week of exploring before we get to Christmas Eve and the Nativity of the Lord.